Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing the BMW N52 common misfires, rough running and vacuum leaks.
What? Goddamn, get it done, will ya? Woo. When the blow up now, everybody's so unusual with it. Shit. But said times in his rhymes, cause his memories. We running through New York, so you.
Okay guys, so as you guys will know, this is the BMW N52 engine. And it doesn't come without all its problems, but the majority of its problems can be rectified very simply and very easy. Now, as many of you guys know, I'm a big fan of this engine, and I also understand this engine very, very well. And today I want to speak about a lot of the rough running issues you will encounter while owning this or when you go and buy it, and how to solve them. We're also going to talk about vacuum leaks, because there isn't really much areas for a vacuum leak on these cars. So I'll be talking to you and telling you how to diagnose that, and also how to rectify rough running on these cars as well. So obviously the first one I want to speak about is rough running and misfiring. So the first one that can cause misfires and rough running is very, very simple. On these N52 engines, if the solenoids do become faulty, they will lead to a rough running of your car, which many people experience either a dip in the RPM or a stumble, or it's failing to make power when they push their foot down, which is very common. If these start sticking, get jammed, or fully stop functioning, what will happen is it will set a fault code off in the DME. Obviously you will end up with a check engine light. You'll be able to clear it, but then the fault will come back. When the fault comes in, it will cut half the power off on the engine. So what will end up happening, it will stop one of the Vanos sprockets turning. Now, what a lot of people ain't aware of is this is how the camshaft adjusters end up breaking their bolts. And this is how a lot of people end up with timing chain failure on these N52s, is because they just keep resetting the code, keep trying to push the power, while that solenoid is not actuating properly. And that's because a lot of people end up taking it to a garage. The garage can't figure out the problem. They go and replace the camshaft sensor because that's the code they're given. It then don't solve it. The garage then is at a loss. They just tell them to keep resetting it and hope it will rectify itself. The person keeps driving it like that. As you're forcing the DME, you're trying to push your foot down on the throttle pedal to try and request more power from the DME and from the car's computers to the actual engine. What ends up happening is one of the Vanos sprockets ain't actually turning, because the DME's actually shut that off. So if the DME shut that sprocket off on that side for that Vanos gear, what's going to end up happening is the timing chain is going to jump. And that is very common on these N52s. The timing chain jumps. Or what ends up happening is the Vanos sprockets, the bolts on them end up backing out and breaking purely for that reason. A lot of the reasons why they do break is because of these solenoids going out, because as I said to many of you guys, when these engines first come out, BMW put an update out to rectify a lot of the fault codes because the Vanos solenoids weren't performing the way they should have been, and BMW knew that. If you do the update on your car, and it has got the latest firmware, I do recommend to update it, it will rectify that issue and obviously stop them bolts backing out or snapping off, or you having a chain failure, purely because that is what causes the chain failures on these from that reason. Another thing that causes rough running and can also cause the timing chain to jump, can also cause the Vanos sprocket bolts to snap and the Vanos sprocket to actually go catastrophic failure, is the ignition coils. A lot of people are not aware of this, but they end up with a misfire and it just says cylinder misfire. Now, most people and most garages, because it should be common sense, will replace ignition coil or a spark plug, because the spark plugs can go bad on these after sitting for some time. The ignition coils can go bad, and when they go bad, it will shut off a cylinder. When it shuts off the cylinder, you do get a few idiots who will still choose to drive the car even though a cylinder has been switched off. And trust me, I know this because there's been quite a few cars, again, on eBay, where people are selling cars saying a cylinder is misfiring on one cylinder, still drivable, still been driving it daily. because they don't care and they haven't even bothered to fix it. And you think to yourself, it's a £30 ignition coil and you can't even bother to fix that. Instead, they're happy to sit there and say that they've just been resetting it with a scan tool and still driving the car as perfect. That is not what you do. Them kind of people and them kind of cars is what you need to avoid. Purely because if they've been driving when the cylinder's been shut off, you're driving on 5 cylinders. You're likely to damage the whole engine, and in the process it will damage your timing chain, because obviously it's stopping the full power coming from the engine, so the timing chain is going to be slowed down. Everything's going to slow down when it's got a cylinder shut off. As soon as a check engine light comes on any car, it's going to shut off whatever cylinder is misfiring, whether it be 1, whether it be 2, whether it be 1, or 3. It will shut them off. And that, like I said to you, it's the same for the solenoids. But people continue to drive these cars, even though they have been warned they've got a check engine light. Instead of getting it repaired, they just choose to drive it into the ground. That's the kind of stuff you guys need to be aware of. If you get that, do not continue to drive your car. There is a lot of people, and I still get it on this channel, who say they can't afford to repair the car. Is there something else they can do? The simple answer is no. If your ignition coil's gone bad, it's bad. You will need to change it. Yeah, and I get a lot of people saying to me, but the car still runs smooth, it's just down on 1 cylinder. Well, of course it's going to run smooth, but it doesn't mean it should be driven like that. All you're doing is damaging the engine long term. People don't realize that. The extra strain you're putting on the engine because a cylinder's off is going to cause all oil leaks, because you're having to push the engine harder, the engine's having to work harder, which then in turn makes the engine run hotter, which then ends up, exposing oil leaks and damaging gaskets, because the engine's having to work under strain because the car's not running properly. And it's very, very normal. That's why you end up seeing a lot of these cars with oil leaks everywhere, damage this, damage that, and they're usually the ones I choose to avoid purely because I know they've been run into the ground. So if you do have a misfire on these engines, make sure to check the solenoids and the ignition coils. They're the 2 things that is going to cause rough running on this engine. The main cause of them 2 is the valve solenoids and the ignition coils. The next one that can cause rough running, which is very unlikely, but I've seen it. I haven't come across it yet, let's say that, but I know it can, is the eccentric shaft sensor, which sits under here. It's on a plug. I do have a video up regarding that. That can go bad. And another thing people like to do is they tend to unplug it and leave the Valvetronic completely deactivated. That is not the correct procedure to do it, because people are trying to get out to take off the valve cover, do all that to replace the eccentric shaft sensor. The eccentric shaft sensor is very expensive. Do not be fooled. I know online there's a lot of Chinese clones of them. Do not use a Chinese one if you have to replace it, because you'll be back down there. But what a lot of people do is they will disconnect that plug and leave it unplugged, and they don't even realize all they're doing is doing more damage to the engine. You're not actually benefiting from any of the full power of the car. You're just removed the main purpose of this engine, which is the whole Valvetronic system, by disconnecting that plug. You are not meant to drive with that unplugged. That is going to cause major damage to the engine and the Valvetronic components. Hence why you see a lot of these cars in the US and the UK needing rebuilds or being sold as spares or repairs, because of what people's idiotic mistakes have done to these cars to try and get them to run and last them as long as possible until they can afford to buy a new car. Because most of them people that do that need to pay a garage to do that work, and it's expensive, and a garage will charge them up to £1,000 just to replace the valve cover, eccentric shaft, the bolts, everything under there, and they don't want to pay for it. So that's how, and that's why these engines go wrong with a rough running, purely because people do not replace these things. So if you are doing your valve cover and you do notice any symptoms of the eccentric shaft sensor, I highly, highly and strongly recommend to change that sensor while you remove the valve cover to get it done, and make sure you change it with a genuine one, not some cheap Chinese £50 one. The proper eccentric shaft sensor is about 170 quid to £200. Make sure to replace it with that, because I'm telling you, you will be back down there replacing that, and you do not want that, because that will cause a lot of rough running on the car. And please, please do not be one of them people to remove it and drive with it removed. That will fix nothing and only cause further damage long term. So the next one, guys, is going to be the Disa Valves. They can cause major rough running and also vacuum leaks where your car is stumbling and feels like it's struggling for power. If you connect it up to a scan tool, it's going to tell you you've got an air leak. Now, many people start trying to do smoke tests, trying to find out where this leak is coming from, and there isn't many vacuum lines on this car. There is nothing. Majority of the time, the air leak is going to be coming from the Disas not fully closing the way they should be. They will stick open or they will be stuck open, which is causing an air leak in the manifold area, which is letting too much air enter back into the cylinders because it's stuck open. If you do get that, the best way to test them is with a scan tool. And the scan tool I highly recommend is the Launch Creator Elite by BMW. That scan tool can literally do everything you need. And many of you guys would have seen I actually use that to diagnose my 130i when the Disa valves were out. I showed you guys how to do that. It's very simple. I actually took them out and showed you how they actuate, how they open and close. That is the way to do it, and you can do it while they're inside the manifold. It's very easy to test them as well. You'll hear them opening and closing. There is no need to really remove them. I just removed them because I was replacing them anyway, because I knew they were faulty, but they will cause a vacuum leak and also rough running. When you get in one of these cars, if you do have a Disa valve problem, if you've just bought it, you will feel like the car's underpowered. And that will be the same like the solenoids. The solenoids will do the same thing. You will feel like the car is very underpowered and you'll think like, what the hell have you bought? It doesn't feel like a 3 litre engine. It'll feel more like a 2 litre engine. It feels very underpowered. And if it does feel underpowered, it will be the Disas sticking. That's why I said, when you do go to purchase one of these, or if you do have one and you need to diagnose your car, you don't need to do no smoke tests. It's very simple. The Disa valves are the main cause of why your car is underpowered. If you see an air leak code in your scan tool, check the Disa valves. They're very well known. They will cause rough running. One of them goes out, you lose it all. So the next one on these that can cause very rough idle, stumbling and vacuum leaks is the CCV pipes. As I've spoken about before, these use 3 CCV pipes. The most common ones to crack are this one here behind the valve cover and the one that goes to the pickup pipe on the sump. This one that runs along the manifold doesn't usually crack until you actually remove it. Now, when they become hard and brittle from the heat being at the back of the engine here, or maybe someone's been down there and removed it before, a lot of garages will just try and put it back without even thinking it's broken because they're wrapped in foam. They crack. Now, when they crack, they can cause a vacuum leak, which can cause your idle to be unsteady, which could cause an air code, an air mass code in the DME. That's why when you scan it, you'll see it's got a leak and you can't figure out where it's coming from. You change everything else. That can cause it. It can also cause your car to stumble and misfire as well and completely bog down. And also a vacuum leak can actually cause a higher fuel consumption as well. If you do have a vacuum leak, to obviously test the CCV pipes if you're worried about taking them off, especially if you have the black valve cover N52 engine, you'll have a Y pipe. The Y pipe is 2 of them that comes down around here and it goes from the valve cover and then comes underneath the manifold, splits off like a Y to the 2 pieces. Obviously they do crack as well. Many of you don't know that, and if you do change your valve cover, you have to change it. If that cracked, you can actually take it off and check it a lot easier than you can with all these single ones, because you're very likely to break them, especially if they've never been changed, especially the ones on the valve cover. You will snap that one, and if someone's already been there and tried to reuse it, it's simply going to be cracked anyway, so it wouldn't have, it's definitely going to have a vacuum leak. So be sure to check that as well. Now the next one here I want to talk about, which is not very common and it's not really spoken about either, and this I've actually seen on quite a few cars, especially when they've come to me, where this has caused an air leak and people have been none the wiser. This actually happened on the 1 Series when the guy had a lot of work done on it and garages had been messing with it and didn't put it back properly. The one that can cause a massive air leak, which a lot of people are not aware of, is this intake boot right here that goes onto the throttle body. A lot of garages and people do not sit that back properly because they don't unloosen the clamp enough, and what they try and do is force on the boot onto the throttle body, which actually causes it to crimp and not sit on the throttle body flush, which then causes an air leak because the throttle body is sitting there open and the unmetered air is coming straight out into the engine bay and not into that intake pipe. That is very, very common for people not to reposition it, especially if work's been done on the car. So if you've had work done on the car and you do have a air leak, vacuum leak, I would check that boot, because garages do not tend to put that back properly because they try and force it on, or they don't forget to tighten it up, which is another common problem because they get in a rush to put it back on, think they can tighten it after they've put the airbox on and everything else, and they don't. They end up forgetting. I get a lot of people replacing the MAF sensor purely because they think there's a fault with the MAF sensor, and that's simply not the case. The MAF sensors do not go wrong. If you've got a MAF sensor code, it's going to be for your Disas, for an air leak on the CCV side, one of the pipes, or it could be this intake boot right here. There really isn't much to cause a vacuum or an air leak from these engines. There is one other thing which we'll go over in a minute that can cause it, but it's very unlikely. Most common causes that I've found have been that boot there that goes on the throttle body and broken CCV pipes, but that is due to being brittle and being old. They do crack over time. That's why this whole CCV system should be overhauled every 100K. The next one that can cause a very, very major air leak is this right here. You're probably looking at me thinking, the oil cap, how does that cause an air leak? The seal on them ends up failing, and if you see right here, I'll just open it up so you see there's a seal right here, a rubber seal. That perishes over time, and when that perishes and it doesn't seal towards the oil cap any longer, it can cause a very high suction, especially when the car started, which if it can't hold the suction properly, it's going to cause a vacuum leak. That little ring, that O-ring that sits around the oil cap, should be changed when you actually change your valve cover. Do make sure to change that, because that is known to cause vacuum leaks, especially if it ain't down properly. That was a problem as well on the 1 Series where someone had done it, and I had to order a whole new cap and everything to make sure it stayed down, because obviously it was completely gone, and that's why the idle was always stumbling and everything like it was due to this causing that, and that boot as well. Like I say, someone had been in there messing about with it before I bought it. The guy did have a lot of work done on it, which was the valve cover, to say the least. He did have the valve cover done, but whatever they done, they didn't put it back correctly. So I had to do that, and we found that it was that causing a leak. So do make sure this seal around the oil cap is correct, and this is holding pressure and not leaking, losing vacuum. Because obviously, as many of you guys know, the CCV uses like an air system which draws excessive oil from the crankcase back down into the sump. And obviously, if this is an air leak, it's not going to be able to do its job properly, which is then going to cause your car to stumble, cause a misfire, and cause your car to run rough as well, because air is seeping through here. So do make sure to check that. So there you have it, guys. Those are just a few of the things that can cause rough running on the BMW N52 engine. They can cause vacuum leaks, and they can also cause misfires as well. Do be sure to check all these things if you are having any of them symptoms. Do not be a parts fitter like a lot of people that we see on YouTube, like we see on garages, just slamming parts based on what the DME says, hoping it will rectify the problem. Make sure you assess, diagnose, run live data, do whatever you have to, test the part before throwing money at the part. Make sure you get all the right voltages and right voltage drops the way they're meant to be, and check the product, check the part. Just make sure everything is fully functional, because what you don't want to be doing is spending money, then returning the part, then putting another part on, doesn't fix it, doing another part, because that's what a lot of people do with these cars. Just keep throwing money, because they don't know how to diagnose them correctly. These engines are very simple. It's not like a turbocharged car. They don't have so many vacuum lines. I know, like if many of you had a diesel, you know there is a lot of vacuum lines on that car. The same with the M54. So if you get a vacuum leak, it's not going to be easy to diagnose like it is on an M52. It's going to be very, very hard. That's why I'm saying to you, this engine is very easy to diagnose. There's people out there with turbocharged cars that would love to have an easy situation just like this to be able to diagnose, but unfortunately they don't. A vacuum leak can turn into a whole day trying to diagnose it and find out what the issue is. Ask me how, I know, and it's not fun. This is a simple car to be able to diagnose any kind of leaks from, and I've told you the majority of the parts. I hope this video will help a lot of you going forward with your M52 engines, and to be able to diagnose them, because like I say, you should be able to diagnose your car very, very simply. If you are struggling, you can easily buy the Launch Creator Elite for BMW, which is an excellent scan tool to help you in your diagnosis, run live data, actuate everything you need to actuate, and be able to read the fault codes. It's a brilliant scan tool, brilliant piece of kit, and it's a must. It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what car you've got. Although a lot of you on this channel buy a lot of these, you know, these cars are coming up 20 years old, you're gonna expect a lot of issues with them. You can't buy this car and expect to have no issues, you know? I paid money for mine just like you paid money for yours. And we just have to face it, that we're gonna have problems. We just move on, fix it, and live with it, and love the car for what they are. Because, like I said to you guys, there's a lot of you who have spent the money and then get angry because you bought a car that ain't running properly. Don't let it stress you. Just find the issue, fix the issue. That's it. Enjoy the car. Like I said, guys, I hope this video helps a lot of you. Thank you very much for watching. This BMW Dr. Dean here, and goodbye.